The first sign that something had changed came at 5:47 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Astronomers at observatories across the night side of Earth noted the sudden appearance of 7 massive objects decelerating into Earth orbit. By dawn, every news network worldwide broadcast the same images: enormous vessels of sleek, iridescent metal hovering silently above major cities. Eliza Chen awoke to her phone exploding with notifications. Half asleep, she dismissed them as another market crash or political crisis, nothing that couldn't wait until after coffee. The corporate attorney had been up until 3 a.m. finalizing documentation for a contentious deep-sea mining dispute. Her specialty in international resource law had earned her both admirers and enemies, but mostly it had earned her exhaustion. When she finally glanced at her television, coffee mug halfway to her lips, she froze. The scrolling headline read, "Alien vessels above major cities, first contact established." "This has to be an elaborate hoax," she muttered, but changed the channel. Same footage. Another channel. Same again. At 9:13 a.m., every digital device on Earth simultaneously received the same message, translated into local languages with perfect syntax and grammar. "Greetings, inhabitants of Earth. We represent the Vextari Federation, a coalition of 7 spacefaring species. Our scans indicate your planet contains mineral resources vital to our continued expansion. According to Galactic standard resource acquisition protocols, we offer fair compensation for extraction rights. Representatives will arrive at your United Nations headquarters at 1200 hours local time to process the standard acquisition agreement. We look forward to a mutually beneficial arrangement." The message was signed with an elaborate symbol that looked like flowing water frozen in time. Global panic was surprisingly minimal. Perhaps humanity had been prepared by decades of science fiction, or perhaps the clinical, bureaucratic tone of the message made the situation seem less threatening than a full-scale invasion. At the hastily assembled emergency session, the Secretary-General greeted 3 tall, blue-skinned beings who emerged from a shuttle that had landed precisely on the building's helipad. The Nithar, as they called themselves, moved with fluid grace, their 4-fingered hands making elaborate gestures as they spoke through small devices at their throats. "We are pleased by your orderly reception," said the lead alien, who introduced himself as Ambassador Zexel. His skin shimmered with subtle patterns that shifted as he spoke. Most developing worlds respond with greater distress. "We appreciate your directness," the Secretary-General responded cautiously. "However, we will need time to review your proposal before making any agreements regarding Earth's resources." The ambassador's skin patterns flickered in what might have been confusion. "Review is unnecessary. The Galactic Standard Resource Acquisition Protocol is universally recognized as fair. We offer technological compensation valued at level 3 exchange rates, which is generous for a pre-full civilization." Nevertheless, the Secretary-General insisted, "Our planetary governance requires consultation among our nations. We request 10 days for proper evaluation." The Nithar representatives conferred among themselves, their skin patterns dancing rapidly. Finally, Ambassador Zexel turned back. 10 days is irregular but acceptable. We will provide our standard contract for your review." He gestured, and one of his companions handed over a sleek tablet-like device. "This contains the full 12,000-page agreement in your primary languages. We will return for signatures." As the aliens departed, the Secretary-General looked down at the tablet with growing dread. Earth needed experts in resource negotiation, the best it had. 3 hours later, Eliza Chen's secure phone rang with a government code she'd never seen before. "Ms. Chen, said a voice she recognized as belonging to the Secretary-General herself. "Your country needs you. Actually, your planet needs you." Eliza Chen stepped through layers of hastily established security into what had been the UN's main conference hall. The room had transformed into a chaotic command center overnight. Military officers huddled around tactical displays showing the alien vessels' positions. Economists furiously calculated potential resource values. Diplomats argued in a dozen languages, while translators struggled to keep pace. "Ms. Chen, thank you for coming so quickly," the Secretary-General said, appearing suddenly at her side. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept since first contact. "You mentioned something about saving the planet," Eliza replied, setting down her briefcase. "I usually just handle corporate mining disputes." The Secretary-General led her to a quieter corner where a group of suited officials waited tensely. "We've assembled experts from various fields, but none specializing in your area. The Vex-Tari agreement primarily concerns mineral rights and resource extraction, your precise expertise." A general interrupted, his voice carrying across the room. "Military options remain on the table. We could coordinate a simultaneous strike against ships that traveled across stars." A NASA scientist countered. "Their technology is centuries beyond ours. One of our missiles wouldn't even scratch their paint job, assuming they even use paint." The Secretary-General handed Eliza a sleek tablet. "This contains their standard agreement. Our translators have been working non-stop, but legal terminology from another civilization poses unique challenges." Eliza scrolled through the document, her litigation instincts awakening. The agreement's structure felt oddly familiar, like terrestrial contracts, but with assumptions she'd never encountered. After 20 minutes of rapid scanning, she looked up. "Has anyone noticed these references to indigenous legal frameworks and pre-existing territorial claims?" she asked. The room fell quiet. "What relevance would those have?" asked a distinguished British diplomat. "Potentially enormous relevance," Eliza said, standing. "These clauses suggest their legal system recognizes existing frameworks. I need a team, not politicians or military, but legal specialists with very specific backgrounds." Within 6 hours, Eliza had assembled her team in a requisitioned hotel suite overlooking Geneva Lake. The Vex-Tari ships hovered silently above the city, their hulls reflecting the sunset. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "Let me introduce everyone. Maya Kingfisher, tribal sovereignty attorney, whose one landmark case is for indigenous rights." A focused woman with long black hair nodded crisply. "The Navajo Nation thanks you for including indigenous perspective in this discussion." Dr. Adebayo Okafor, theoretical space law, Eliza continued. A tall man with spectacles smiled. "My colleagues laughed when I specialized in extraterrestrial legal theory. Who's laughing now?" "Regina Walsh, corporate negotiations specialist." A sharp-featured woman in an impeccable suit didn't look up from her tablet. "I've reviewed their proposal. Amateur work. They've left at least 7 major vulnerabilities." "I'm Professor Liu Zhang, linguistics and semantic analysis," Eliza finished. An elderly man with kind eyes bowed slightly. "Every language contains ambiguities. Finding them is merely a matter of proper examination." Eliza projected the alien contract onto the wall. "We have 9 days to find leverage in 12,000 pages of alien legalese. The Vex-Tari seem to venerate legal procedure with almost religious devotion. That gives us an opening." "You're suggesting we outlawyer a spacefaring civilization?" Regina asked with raised eyebrows. Eliza smiled for the first time since the ships appeared. That's exactly what I'm suggesting. They came expecting an easy resource grab from primitives. Let's show them what Earth's finest legal minds can do. The team exchanged determined glances as they began dividing the document into sections. Outside, the alien ships loomed against the darkening sky, their lights blinking steadily like patient predators. By the third day, their hotel suite resembled a war room. Holographic displays filled the air with floating paragraphs of alien text. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers littered every surface. No one had slept more than 4 hours at a stretch. "Look at this," Dr. O'Cuffer said, projecting a section from page 4392. Their definition of sovereign territorial claim includes a footnote referencing the doctrine of original habitation. I believe they're legally required to respect established claims with historical precedent. Maya leaned forward. Earth has thousands of overlapping indigenous claims dating back millennia. The Vextari's entire approach assumes unified planetary governance. Precisely, Eliza said, her eyes bright despite her exhaustion. And that's just the beginning. Professor Zhang, what have you found? The linguistics expert manipulated his holographic display. Their legal language lacks subjunctive constructions. They have no equivalent for might or cooled. Only is or is not. Their law appears to have no room for interpretation or judicial creativity, which makes them vulnerable to our legal system's deliberate ambiguities. Regina added, smiling like a predator. I've identified 27 places where we can introduce qualifying clauses that their rigid thinking won't anticipate. Eliza nodded. And their obsession with procedure is our greatest advantage. They follow their own rules with religious devotion. She walked to the window, watching one of the alien ships hover above Lake Geneva. Its massive presence should have terrified her, but instead she felt a growing confidence. We're not going to beat them with technology or strength, she said quietly. We're going to beat them with paperwork. On the 5th day, they presented their preliminary findings to the UN Security Council. The room was tense with skepticism. You're suggesting we fight alien invaders with contract law? Asked the French representative, not bothering to hide his derision. Eliza displayed a section of her analysis. The Vextari legal system is their religion, their science, and their military strategy combined. Their ships won't fire on us if we file the correct injunction. Their harvesters won't extract if we've submitted proper ownership documentation. This is fantasy. The Russian delegate scoffed. They will simply take what they want. Dr. O'Cuffer stepped forward. We've analysed records they provided of previous resource acquisitions. They've never violated their own legal protocols, even when it cost them significantly. We need to draft a counter-proposal deliberately designed to entangle them in their own system, Eliza continued. We'll invoke everything from 15th century papal divisions of the New World to modern maritime law to indigenous claims predating written history. We'll create a legal labyrinth so complex they'll be forced to negotiate rather than simply dictate terms. The Secretary General studied Eliza carefully. And you believe this will work? I once stopped a $1 trillion deep-sea mining operation with a single clause from an obscure 19th century shipping treaty, Eliza replied. This is the same principle on a larger scale. The Security Council debated for hours before finally authorizing Eliza's approach, less from conviction than from lack of alternatives. By the 8th day, the counter-proposal was complete, 15,782 pages of the most complex legal document ever created by human hands. It contains citations from every legal system on Earth, overlapping claims, procedural requirements, and thousands of carefully crafted ambiguities. "It's ready," Eliza told her exhausted team as they finalized the document. "Tomorrow, we give the Vextari something they've never encountered before, a species that fights with fine print instead of weapons." The alien ships maintained their silent vigil above Earth's major cities, their occupants entirely unaware of the paper storm about to engulf them. The Vextari delegation arrived at the United Nations precisely at noon on the 10th day. Their shuttle descended with mathematical precision onto the landing pad. Ambassador Zexel led a procession of 7 aliens, the tall, blue-skinned Nithar diplomats, flanked by smaller grey beings with 6 limbs and oversized craniums. The Great Assembly Hall had been reconfigured for the historic meeting. World leaders and their advisors filled one side, while the alien delegation took their positions at the opposite table. Camera drones hovered silently, broadcasting to billions worldwide. "We appreciate your thorough review of our standard acquisition agreement," Ambassador Zexel began, his skin patterns projecting calm confidence. "We are prepared to receive your formal acceptance and proceed with resource extraction within standard parameters." Eliza Chen, seated beside the Secretary General, stood and approached the center table. "Ambassador, on behalf of Earth, I present our response to your proposal." She gestured, and assistants wheeled in carts containing printed copies of their counter-proposal, a symbolic mountain of paper that caused visible reactions among the small grey aliens. "Our document addresses numerous points requiring clarification under Galactic standard resource acquisition protocols," Eliza continued, her voice steady, "particularly regarding pre-existing sovereign claims and indigenous legal frameworks." One of the grey aliens leaned toward Zexel, its multiple limbs moving in agitated patterns as it whispered urgently. The ambassador's skin rippled with what might have been annoyance. "This is," he paused, searching for words, "unexpected. Our agreement requires only signature, not revision. According to Section 7.329 of your own document, all indigenous legal concerns must be addressed before extraction can proceed," Eliza replied smoothly. "Earth has 195 recognized sovereign nations, each with distinct legal systems, plus thousands of indigenous territorial claims predating our modern governments." The grey beings began rapidly scanning the counter-proposal with handheld devices, their enormous eyes blinking rapidly. One made a high-pitched sound that the translation devices didn't process. "This will require consultation," Ambassador Zexel finally said. "We request an extension of 3 standard days to review your response." Eliza nodded graciously. "Of course, Ambassador. Under your procedural guidelines, such an extension automatically triggers Protocol 5.7, requiring a preliminary assessment phase before any resource survey can begin." The ambassador's skin patterns froze momentarily. "You are citing Vextara procedural law." "We found your legal frameworks fascinating," Eliza replied, "particularly the doctrine of original habitation and the sovereignty recognition mandates." The delegation conferred among themselves in rapid, clicking language. The world leaders watched in tense silence as the aliens' demeanor shifted from confident to increasingly concerned. "We will reconvene after our review," Ambassador Zexel finally announced, his formal tone betrayed by the agitated patterns rippling across his skin. As the aliens departed, the Secretary General turned to Eliza. "What just happened?" "They came expecting a simple signing ceremony," Eliza explained. "Instead, they're facing the most complex legal challenge they've ever encountered. They'll need to consult their full legal team aboard their ships. And that helps us how? Every delay works in our favor Regina Walsh interjected. Their automated systems are now processing our counter-proposal, which means extraction cannot begin until resolution. In the alien shuttle returning to their vessel, the Vextari legal advisors were in heated discussion. This species uses legal procedure as a weapon, one observed. They've intentionally constructed a document designed to create procedural gridlock. Ambassador Zexel stared out at the blue planet below. In 800 cycles of resource acquisition, we have never encountered a pre-FTL civilization that fought back with our own legal code. Perhaps, offered another advisor with reluctant admiration, we have underestimated these humans. 3 days stretched into 5 as the Vextari legal team dissected Earth's counter-proposal. Military satellites observed frenzied activity aboard their vessels. Lights blazed through the ship's viewports at all hours, and communications between the fleet increased tenfold. In her temporary office at the UN, Eliza met with her team to prepare their next move. They're taking longer than expected, Dr. Okafor noted. Our complexity strategy is working. Professor Zhang adjusted his spectacles. Their communication patterns suggest confusion. They're consulting extensive databases, possibly seeking precedents. Time to escalate, Eliza decided. Regina, is the Galactic class action document ready? Regina nodded, sliding a tablet across the table. It's beautifully twisted. I almost feel sorry for them. The Secretary-General entered, looking troubled. Several nations are losing patience. Russia and China are threatening unilateral military action if this legal approach fails. It won't fail, Eliza assured her. Tell them to stand down for 12 more hours. We're about to implement Phase 2. The Vextari had established a legal terminal in the UN building, a sleek, crystalline structure that connected directly to their fleet's central database. Access was strictly controlled, but as Earth's designated legal representative, Eliza had been granted limited use rights. At precisely midnight, Eliza approached the terminal alone. She placed her palm against its smooth surface. The crystal hummed, recognizing her biometric signature. I wish to file a formal legal petition under Galactic Code 372.5, subsection 11, she stated clearly. The terminal pulsed with soft blue light as it processed her request. Proceed, came the synthesized response. Eliza uploaded the document Regina had prepared, a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of all current and future inhabitants of Earth against the Vextari Federation. The lawsuit cited 17 violations of the Federation's own acquisition protocols, including failure to conduct proper environmental impact assessments and inadequate notification procedures. Most critically, it invoked an ancient precedent from the Vextari legal archives, the principle of inhabited world sovereignty, established 12,000 years earlier after a resource dispute with another species. The terminal processed her submission, its lights shifting from blue to amber to deep red. A series of chimes followed, each in a different tone. Petition accepted, the terminal announced. Automatic injunction protocols initiated under Galactic Code 372.511.8. All extraction activities suspended pending legal review. Eliza released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Confirmation document, please. The terminal produced a crystalline card covered in alien script. Official notice of legal proceedings. Retain for records. Across Geneva, the massive harvester ships that had been positioning for initial surveys suddenly powered down their external equipment. Their collection apparatus retracted into their hulls as automated systems responded to the legal filing. By dawn, news had spread worldwide. Crowds gathered in major cities, cheering as they watched the alien ships retreat to higher orbits, not leaving, but no longer poised to begin extraction. Not everyone celebrated. Eliza received death threats from those who believed her legal maneuvers would eventually trigger alien retaliation. Military leaders continued preparing defensive strategies, convinced the Vextari would eventually lose patience. Ambassador Zexel requested an emergency meeting, his normally composed demeanor visibly strained. Your class action petition has activated automated regulatory protocols, he stated, skin patterns flashing rapidly. This is unprecedented. We're simply utilizing the legal frameworks you provided, Eliza replied calmly. No species has ever used our legal system against us in this manner, the ambassador said, studying her with new intensity. I begin to understand why your planet has so many legal specialists. You weaponize procedure itself. We prefer to call it due process, Eliza responded with a slight smile. I believe we now have grounds for a more balanced negotiation. The ambassador's skin patterns settled into a steady rhythm. Indeed, my superiors have authorized me to discuss alternative arrangements. Professor Liu Zhang hadn't left the research room in 36 hours. Surrounded by holographic displays of Vextari legal archives, he methodically traced connections between cases spanning millennia of galactic history. The Federation had reluctantly provided access to their legal database after Eliza cited Transparency Clause 89.7, which required full disclosure during active litigation. Maya entered with fresh coffee and paused, seeing the professor's intense concentration. You found something, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, John replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Look at these acquisition patterns. He gestured at a three-dimensional timeline showing thousands of planetary transactions. The Vextari have been collecting resources from inhabited worlds for over 20,000 years. Earth isn't their first, it's merely the latest. Maya set down the coffee. We suspected as much. But observe these outliers, Zhang continued, highlighting several points in the display. In each case, the indigenous species successfully negotiated significantly better terms than originally offered. He expanded one case file. The Krilta, an aquatic species from Sector 87, used water rights precedents to secure 90% resource retention. The door opened as Eliza and the others arrived for their morning briefing. Zhang immediately shared his findings, pointing out patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. The Vextari follow a standard negotiation template, Regina observed, studying the data. They initially offer minimal compensation, expecting primitive gratitude. When resistance occurs, they apply increasing pressure while making minor concessions. But they consistently avoid legal proceedings, Dr. O'Cuffer added, excitement growing in his voice. In every case where formal proceedings were initiated, they'd offered substantial compromises to settle quickly. Eliza leaned forward, scrolling through the highlighted cases. They're hiding something. Something about their legal system they don't want scrutinized too closely. Maya suddenly straightened. Look at this reference. Section 42, Protective Status Classification. It's mentioned in several successful negotiations, but never explained. Dr. Okafor accessed a cross-reference database. It appears to be related to something called the Representative Accommodation Clause. Species that qualify for certain classifications receive dramatically different treatment. They never mentioned any classifications when presenting their initial offer to Earth, Eliza noted, her litigation instincts sharpening. That could constitute material omission under their own disclosure requirements. The team worked through the morning, connecting disparate pieces of information from the massive database. A pattern gradually emerged, a complex system of species classification that determined resource rights, with criteria including technological development, cultural complexity, and genetic diversity. "They've been evaluating us all along," Regina realized. Their initial offer assumed we'd fall into the lowest classification. "But our legal response has forced them to reconsider," Eliza said. "This changes everything." She pulled up a blank document. "We need to draft a formal petition for classification review, citing these precedents and demanding evaluation under all relevant criteria." Dr. Okafor studied the successful negotiations from other worlds. "We should go further. The Vex-Tari value stability and predictability. What if we offered limited resource access in exchange for recognition and protection?" "Protection?" Maya asked. "Galactic recognition," he clarified. "Official standing," a voice in their system. Eliza's eyes widened as she understood. "Not just better compensation. We demand a seat at the table." The team exchanged glances, the audacity of the idea sinking in. "They won't expect it," Regina said with a predatory smile. "No primitive species has ever demanded Federation membership as part of resource negotiations." "Draft the proposal," Eliza decided. "I want to see Ambassador Zexel's face when I present it." Outside, the Vex-Tari ships maintained their holding pattern, their occupants unaware that the humans had just discovered the key to transforming the entire negotiation. The Galactic arbitration chamber resembled a massive geodesic dome, its translucent crystalline panels refracting starlight into prismatic patterns across the floor. Earth's delegation, Eliza and her team, plus scientific and diplomatic advisors, tried to maintain composure as they took their assigned positions. They had arrived aboard a Vex-Tari transport, the journey taking mere hours through technologies humans had only dreamed about. Ambassador Zexel had nearly lost his diplomatic composure when Eliza presented their demand for Federation membership. His skin patterns had cycled through colors so rapidly that the translation devices struggled to interpret his physiological response. After consulting with his superiors, he had reluctantly agreed to formal arbitration. The Vex-Tari never expected a pre-FTL civilization to invoke the right of appeal, Dr. Okafor whispered. "This chamber hasn't handled a case like ours in over 3,000 years." The Vex-Tari delegation entered through a shimmering portal on the opposite side. Ambassador Zexel, accompanied by the formidable Arbiter Kizoth, a towering figure whose aged blue skin bore ceremonial markings indicating centuries of legal service. The small grey legal advisors scurried alongside, their multiple limbs manipulating holographic displays. The chamber's central space activated, particles of light coalescing into a rotating crystalline structure, the arbitration eye that would judge their case. "Proceedings will commence according to Galactic standard protocols," announced the AI in a harmonious voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "The representatives of Sol 3 have petitioned for resource acquisition review and classification reassessment." Arbiter Kizoth stepped forward, his movements deliberate and precise. "This appeal is without merit. The Sol system inhabitants have no standing to request classification review. Their technological development remains pre-FTL, their planetary governance is fragmentary, and their history demonstrates persistent conflict." Eliza rose, trying to match the Arbiter's formal demeanor despite her racing heart. "We challenge both the classification assessment and the procedural violations in the initial approach to our world." What followed was 3 days of the most complex legal argumentation ever conducted by humans. Each member of Eliza's team deployed their specialized knowledge with surgical precision. Maya presented indigenous sovereignty principles that predated written history. Dr. Okafor connected Earth's theoretical space law concepts to galactic precedents. Professor Zhang identified crucial translation discrepancies in key terminology. Regina handled cross-examination, her corporate negotiation experience proving devastatingly effective against the Vextari legal team. When Arbiter Kizoth claimed Earth's fragmented legal systems demonstrated primitive development, she systematically proved how this diversity created adaptive resilience that many homogeneous galactic legal systems lacked. The pivotal moment came on the third day. Eliza presented evidence from the Vextari's own archives regarding the principle of adaptive intelligence. An ancient ruling establishing that species, demonstrating rapid cultural and technological adaptation, deserved special consideration regardless of development stage. The Truxell case of Cycle 42,973 established that adaptability itself represents advanced evolution, Eliza argued, displaying the obscure precedent that Professor Zhang had discovered buried deep in the archives. Earth's legal, cultural, and technological systems have demonstrated unprecedented adaptation rates. We qualify for protected status under your own established criteria. The crystalline AA pulsed with intensity, its rotation accelerating as it processed the argument. Arbiter Kizoth conferred urgently with his team, clearly disturbed by the citation of a precedent so ancient that even they had forgotten it. The arbitration requires computational analysis beyond standard parameters, the AA finally announced. All parties will observe recess until determination is complete. As the chamber lights dimmed, Ambassador Zexel approached Eliza, his skin patterns expressing what the translator identified as reluctant admiration. "No species has forced computational recess in my lifetime," he said quietly. "Your legal creativity is disturbing." After 28 hours of computational analysis, an eternity in galactic legal proceedings, the arbitration chamber reactivated. The crystalline air expanded to fill the central space, its facets glowing with ethereal light as both delegations took their positions. "Determination complete," the air announced, its harmonious voice reverberating through the chamber. "This case presents unprecedented complexities requiring special consideration." The Vextari delegation maintained formal composure, but their skin patterns betrayed tension. Earth's team clasped hands beneath the table, a human gesture of solidarity that transcended their professional differences. The petition submitted by Sol 3 representatives contains multiple valid claims, the AA continued. First, the initial resource acquisition approach failed to properly classify indigenous legal frameworks, violating Protocols 37.2 through 41.8. Eliza squeezed Maya's hand as the indigenous rights specialist straightened proudly. Second, Earth's legal systems, while chaotically structured by galactic standards, demonstrate advanced conceptual development and adaptive problem-solving. The diversity of approaches represents an evolutionary advantage previously unrecognized in classification assessments. Professor Zhang nodded in quiet satisfaction. Third, pursuant to the Truxell precedent of Cycle 42,973, adaptive intelligence must be evaluated on technological trajectory rather than current development stage. Earth's accelerated advancement from pre-industrial to spacefaring within 3 centuries exceeds standard developmental curves by 47.3%. Dr. Okafor closed his eyes briefly, his theoretical work validated at last. Therefore, this arbitration determines the Vextari Federation must renegotiate resource acquisition through proper channels, including complete environmental impact studies and fair compensation, as defined by Earth's existing legal frameworks. Ambassador Zexal's skin flickered with resigned acknowledgement, but the AA wasn't finished. Furthermore, Earth is granted provisional membership in the Galactic Federation, with observer status effective immediately and full voting rights subject to a 5-year evaluation period. The chamber fell completely silent. The Vex-Tari legal advisors froze in apparent shock, their 6-limbed gestures suspended mid-motion. No one had anticipated such a radical ruling, not even Eliza's team in their most optimistic projections. This arbitration is concluded. Let the determination be recorded in perpetuity. The crystalline structure condensed into a small, glowing object that floated to Eliza, a physical record of the proceedings and their historic outcome. As they departed the chamber, Earth's delegation maintained professional decorum until reaching their private transport room. Then, away from alien eyes, they embraced in tearful celebration. They had secured not merely Earth's resources, but humanity's place among the stars. By the time they returned to Earth, the news had already spread throughout the planet. The massive harvester ships had repositioned into standard diplomatic formation, still present, but no longer threatening. Global celebrations erupted as humanity realized the existential threat had transformed into unprecedented opportunity. 2 weeks later, Eliza attended a private meeting with Ambassador Zexal aboard his vessel. The formal negotiations for limited resource access were proceeding through proper channels, with Earth now bargaining from a position of legal equality. Our analysis teams are studying your legal systems intensively, the ambassador admitted, his skin patterns displaying complex emotions the translators identified as reluctant respect with cautious optimism. We have identified 17 approaches we had never considered in our 12,000 years of jurisprudence. He extended a 4-fingered hand in the human gesture he had learned. Perhaps we have more to exchange than minerals. Eliza smiled and accepted the handshake. I believe we do. She slid forward a datapad displaying a new proposal. Her standard consulting contract with rates listed in rare elements, along with a clause for assisting similarly situated planets. The universe is full of voices waiting to be heard, she said. Earth specializes in finding perspectives others overlook. I think that's worth more than any mineral we possess. Ambassador Zexal's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. Indeed, the litigation species has found its place in the galaxy.